So glad to have everyone here. The last panel, panel number 4. My name is Andre Bonto. I'm a leader within the petrochemical and refining industry. I want to thank first the mayor for this opportunity to moderate this session. Certainly this is very, very poignant to all of us as it relates to strengthening our community lifelines. And we have 4 distinguished guests on the panel today that hopefully will provide a lot of insight for us. So with no further ado, we'll go ahead and get started first with introducing our first panel guest, Mr. Philip May. Mr. May is the CEO of Entergy Louisiana, where he oversees the delivery of energy to millions of customers across the state. Mr. May has led initiatives to modernize the grid and to ensure reliable, affordable power for our communities. His leadership in the energy sector is instrumental in driving Louisiana's economic growth and resilience. So let's give him a hand.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Chris Fontenot, Director of Operations for Vexus. Chris is Director of Operations at Vexus, where he spearheads the company's efforts to deliver cutting-edge fiber optic services to communities across the region, with a focus on operational excellence and customer satisfaction. Chris ensures that Vexus consistently provides reliable, high-speed internet and communication solutions where and when they are needed. So let's give him a round of applause. Next, we have Mr. Perry Vincent, who's president of LRC Wireless. Mr. Vincent is a leading expert in wireless communications as the president of LRC Wireless, with extensive experience in designing and implementing advanced wireless solutions. Perry has played a pivotal role in expanding connectivity across diverse regions. He has firmly established LRC as a trusted name in the industry. So let's welcome Mr. Vincent. And finally, we have Mr. Josh Fontenot, Vice President of Wagner Engineering. Josh Fontenot is the Vice President of Wagner Engineering, where he plays a crucial role in delivering innovative and efficient solutions for complex projects. With a strong background in civil engineering, my forte, and project management, Josh has been instrumental in successful execution of numerous infrastructure development for a wide range of clients. So let's give him a round of applause. So I'd like to take this time also to remind the audience that we will allow questions toward the end. So if you would, complete your question cards and raise your hand and someone will pick them up. Also, we'll have questions at the end of the session with the allotted time given us today. So if you would, once again, we're looking forward to this panel, and we'll go ahead and get started with some of the questions we have here. Let's start off first with a question for Mr. May. Philip, what has industry done to improve resiliency in Lake Charles? And then to add on that, why is it important to invest in resiliency?
Great, I'll take a shot at that. You know, first of all, when talking about resiliency, we have a grid that there's over 1 million distribution poles, and for the most part, that's the wooden poles that you see when you drive on a highway and so forth, just below the I-10-12 area. So we have a lot of poles in the state. We serve customers from essentially Grand Isle up to Bossier City into the other end of the eastern part of the northern state. A lot of service area, a lot of exposure to risk into storms and so forth. Not just hurricanes, we also have ice storms, we have floods, we have all of these things we deal with. And what we're finding is the extremes that show up and are inflicted upon our systems are different than they were when these systems were built many decades ago. So in terms of what have we done for resiliency, well, first of all, we elevate our standards. So every time we build a new line, it's to a high standard. If it's generally in the I-10 or north, it's 125. If you get further south, it's 150 mile per hour standard for those poles and structures, particularly transmission lines, that kind of a thing. For instance, after Katrina, Rita, and Gustav, Ike, we realized that we needed to elevate those standards, and so we did. And so every structure that has been built since that time is at an elevated standard. We address those standards over time. We reassess to see whether or not they made sense. And certainly after what we had in 2020 and 2021, it made sense to reassess again. Let's build to an even higher standard. It wasn't just about the poles and wires. It's also thinking about, well, we need to elevate the substations to get some of those sensitive equipments out of the harm's way from rising water or from tidal surge and those types of things. So it's thinking about how that works. So in terms of what we've done for Lake Charles, a lot of has been cumulative over time. But what happened with Ida, Delta, Laura, Zeta, those storms that happened over those 2-year periods, we realized that the practice of simply building new and upgrading as we go was insufficient to address what we're seeing in a way. And we can say climate change or we don't need to debate about what the cause is. What we do know is the storms we're seeing are more frequent and more severe. For instance, ice storms. We have a line that runs from Texas over to south of here at Calcasieu Pass. There's been a line there for more than 50 years. Until the past couple of years, we've never had an incident where that line did something called galloping, where you get enough ice on it, and if you think about what ice, it forms this teardrop shape, and when the wind comes, it creates an airfoil, and the lines move slowly and then ultimately connect with each other, causing the power to go off, resetting, causing the power to go off again. So it's a real problem. But think about that. For more than 50 years, have never had that issue, and then twice in a span of a few years. So we're seeing not only the extremes from hurricanes, we're seeing the extremes from other weather conditions. And I know this crowd is very familiar with the floods we saw over the past many years and so forth. So it's thinking differently about that. Now, I'm proud to say that we kicked off our resiliency program. The Louisiana Public Service Commission recently approved a list of projects, 2,100 projects, 69,000 poles across the entire state that we'll be doing. We kicked that off right here in Louisiana. What better place could there be, really, to kick off a resiliency program? I can't think of a more resilient place anywhere along the Gulf Coast, probably in the entire U.S. And so it was a right place to do that. And what we're doing is we're spending about $107 million in the Lake Charles area to build stronger poles and wires and so forth. So it's a thoughtful program. And listen, it's not going to replace every line in a neighborhood. This is the initial phase. It's going to be done over many years. But it starts with those critical circuits, making sure that our hospitals have stronger circuits, making sure that our pumping stations have stronger circuits, hospitals, those kinds of things. Thinking about what are those critical parts that we need to operate after a storm. Because resiliency on our grid is not about, I'm sorry to say, not about assuring the power will not go out, because Mother Nature, I assure you, can find something that will knock the power out. It's about, can we get the power back on in days instead of weeks? And while we're doing that, think about the other things we need. Social infrastructure, so to speak. Well, you need grocery stores. If we can get the power back on in days instead of weeks, you can hunker down, you can stay at home. If we can make gasoline available by having power to gas stations or backup generation to gas stations, to grocery stores, to pharmacies, make sure that our hospital's up and running, because everyone knows after a hurricane, the first thing you do is get your chainsaw out, and boy, you definitely need hospitals. So it really is about thinking, how do we make that happen? How do we improve the infrastructure? Because we know Mother Nature will throw some new challenges to us. And we want to build the grid that is not completely invulnerable, so to speak, but is able to be up and running again. Because what we also know is until the power comes back on, our communities can't get back on its feet. In terms of why is it important? Our communities can't get back on their feet until the power is back on. It really is, electricity is the quintessential first responder. So many parts of our society cannot work until we get the power back up and running. So that we know that's critically important. When Harvey struck Houston many years ago, the study was done, At that time, average family of 4, it cost $1,200 to evacuate. And I know if you live far enough south, you're probably going to get a mandatory evacuation, but for many areas, that evacuation comes because they can't be without power for a couple weeks or several weeks. And if you look at what is the average savings for emergency events for a family of 4, it's about $400. So they really can't even afford to evacuate. So part of the resiliency program actually is saving our customers, our communities, the cost and the trauma of having to evacuate after an event. And if we do those kinds of things, the other second part that's important for electricity, we were talking about this a few moments ago, many of our workers are hourly workers. If the power's not on, they may not be working. So on top of having to potentially dip into what savings they have to evacuate, they also aren't working, which is an even larger financial hit to them. So why is resiliency important? It really is absolutely essential to the health of our communities. To ensure that our communities thrive, we have to have a resilient grid, and not just a resilient grid, resilient infrastructure in general. And so I think that is critically important to think about is how do we build resilient communities? It starts with electricity, but I'm sure my fellow panelists will elaborate on the other things that are absolutely essential. We know that next storm is coming. We know that Mother Nature will throw powerful things at us that will challenge even what we've seen in the past. By building resilient communities, including our grid, we can make sure that our communities get back on their feet quickly, get commerce going again, so our lives can get back to normal again, and our communities can thrive.
Thank you, Philip. Appreciate that. Let me go and extend that question to Mr. Fontenot, Chris Fontenot, Vexus.
Yep. So, energy is the first responder. You can't disagree there. It gets you back up and running. But there's plenty of things that come ahead of that priority-wise. But in today's day and age, being able to connect to the internet and being able to get the word out to loved ones that you're okay, or be able to connect with emergency services if you're not okay, or just a simple distraction of you just spent all day in the yard clearing trees. I just want to throw something on TV so I just cannot think for a few seconds, right? So part of the draw for me to join Vexus Fiber, coming over from one of our local competitors, is the responses that we saw in this area to those storms and all of the devastation that happened was about as tone deaf and as blind as you could possibly see. So I'm really excited to join Vexus Fiber and come over and build a 100% underground network. You can't be storm-proof. There's just no such thing. You can put yourself in a better position to respond to those. So a fiber provider, which is what we are, building 100% underground to rely less on commercial power and be a more passive technology where if you've got, whether you've got power on or not, you can, the fiber is still going to be providing that connectivity to your home. It's a little more expensive for us to build on an underground as opposed to a mixed bag of underground and where utilities are already underground and aerial and the rest of it. But it certainly saves us a ton of money in restoration cost, and also allows for us to be that more reliable, more consistent provider in the area.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Vincent, the resiliency improvements here in Lake Charles, can you just give us a brief description of some of the things you guys have done?
During RETA, we learned a whole lot. I think when everything's finished up, we'd all I'm talking about all of our public safety entities, the state, local government agencies, and the industry, would all get together and would kind of talk about things beforehand once a month in some local meetings they have. But we started a communications meeting where all of the government agencies started talking together. Once a quarter, we'd get together, and I think that started a plan of to be resilient when the next one hit. And as a company, we already were mission critical in what we do. Our facility we built in the early 2000s to be resilient for a hurricane. It's a cement building. And our core work is all mission critical. So we're 24/7. there's no to us. You don't say no, and so because we have to respond, because typically what we're responding to is to make sure somebody's uptime is there, or they're going to lose time, money, and something could just catastrophe could happen in that business if we don't keep the communications going. So being the public safety agencies, all those, we're all sitting talking together and looking at each other, and as a vendor and a servicer, we developed where we should put redundancy at, what we should do within the parish and the region, the southwest region of where we should have communications placed. And that being said, all the time until we got to Laura, we planned those things. Things were pretty much in place to work. We had a few things we had to iron out going along the way, but we were working towards that. When Laura hit, we hit the ground pretty much running. I say we, us, and the public safety industries and industry all kind of had planned and knew this was going to come. And the weeks ahead of time, we're always sitting together, having immediate meetings of everybody together and making decisions of what we're going to do, how we're going to make things happen. What happens if we lose something? Is things in place to communicate? And when I say communicate, today, before Laura, communication was just pushing the radio and making sure you could talk to that other person because you weren't relying on the cell phone. Today, your cell phones have been hardened. We got things like FirstNet and things that have hardened the cell phone industry where your cell sites should stay up. But at the same token, those are dependent upon a network. And if that network's not running, you don't communicate. And the public safety and the industrial industry, they've got to talk to each other within an area, a small area, or a little larger area of a region part. And so communications that they can control, that we're not relying on a network, is what's crucial. And that's what we all have to decide and put together and figure out how that's going to work. And going into Laura, we had a pretty good position in that place. Our company itself, we don't evacuate. We have to have a team of people that are there. We have to have a facility that we can be in. When the hurricane hits, the moment it's over, whether it's daylight or dark, when it's ready to hit the road, we have to be on the road with public safety and the responders to see what we can do. Where's our communications coming from? What's out? What isn't out? And I think going into Laura, this area was pretty sustained where we had a good hold on it. We found out some things during Laura, and we've rectified those. And I think going forward, we're probably one of the strongest places there is, and I'll say in the country. I know today in Baton Rouge, when we go to Baton Rouge every quarter and talk about communications throughout the state, they look at Southwest Louisiana as a model. You guys may not know that, but Southwest Louisiana, our communication structure for public safety and industry is looked at as a representative of how things happen. Whenever we have hurricanes, we don't go hollering and crying for things. We have things already here. We ask for extra help, but that's it. And I'm talking on the public safety side. Industry-wise, we've got things pretty together. But when it comes to public safety, we've got to keep homes and people safe and sound and have those together. So today, we're way more resilient than what we were. We learned a lot in Rita, and going into Laura, I think we're pretty strong, very strong, I think, of where we're at today. We could probably put ourselves up against pretty much anybody in the country to look and see what we've got in place and how things happen and how strong we would be if we come across another incident like we just had.
Thank you, Mr. Vinson. Mr. Josh Fontenot, Wagner Engineering. Water and wastewater resiliency is your specialty. So can you talk a little bit about the tools of your trade, the AMI, HMGP, generators, and et cetera, in terms of your business?
Sure, I can give some context to that. So I guess we as Wagner are primarily an engineering firm circled around water and wastewater. We do a lot of consulting work to the city of Lake Charles from a programmatic standpoint as well as conventional engineering delivery of projects. But I guess in the context of the conversation, we primarily helped with, as related to Laura Delta, was we got a call for help after Laura, and it was we put some boots on the ground. We got some issues, and so we used our staff to come in and kind of subsidize some of the city staff and help provide some direction as to how to best get things back up. I think what we gained from that experience was an understanding that we need to have proper planning in place before these events. It can't just all be response. It needs to be muscle memory type response instead of figuring out what the issue is and then navigating towards a solution. It's understanding all of your assets. It's understanding what sort of issues could occur at those assets and having a plan in place to implement in the event that that were to occur. And so that's, as far as resiliency is concerned, from that standpoint, I'd say planning is the piece that we've navigated most effectively, and it's evidenced through our response between Laura and Delta. Just from a water standpoint, water was down after Laura for roughly 3 to 5 days. Hurricane Delta, a month later, from lessons learned, we never lost water. And that's just in that month of experience and planning, we were able to implement better processes. From an infrastructure standpoint, prior to Laura, only 40% of the water production facilities had backup power on site. Today, as we sit here today, 100% of those facilities have backup power. So from that standpoint, as far as it relates to providing critical services to hospitals, to residents, giving them the things that they need to come back home, we're way better positioned today as it was before Laura. Take it a step further, I look at resiliency in our world as not just resilient in the sense of hardened infrastructure, but redundant infrastructure. Lake Charles's normal water production is in the order of about 14 million gallons a day. Present day, we can produce about 18 million gallons of water a day, and that's now with backup power. In about 12 months' time, we're going to have the production capacity of 24 million gallons of water a day. So in the event of a critical loss at one of our 7 water production facilities, we're going to have a redundant feed in that regard to be able to subsidize what we may have lost through the loss of a complete facility. So it's through that investment that Lake Charles has made, is to provide that resiliency.
Okay, excellent. And that's been a common theme with regards to planning,
Absolutely.
strategic focus for every area we've talked about here today, and even in some of the early panels. So good to hear that in your space. I'm going to follow up with you, Josh, with regards to what advice do you have for municipal planners and disaster response teams for being better prepared and being able to respond quickly to the needs in their communities?
It really starts with that planning effort. And it starts with breaking your group up into teams and having them, the ones that understand the infrastructure that you own, and going through the what ifs. What if a flood? If it does flood, where are we most concerned with that occurring, and what's going to be the potential consequence associated with that event? We all know in a hurricane, we're going to lose power. It's just reality. And so be well positioned with on-site generation at your most critical facilities, and have push packages in line to where you can bring in temporary generated power to provide those services. Come up with those plans, have them in place, put them in writing, and have your staff go through exercises of implementing them. Between Hurricane Rita and Hurricane Laura, I'm sure after Hurricane Rita, there was a plan in place. Fast forward 20 years later, you've had turnover of staff, you've had all of these different things that have occurred, and you, at some point, we're people, you get complacent. It's not going to happen again, right? Acknowledge that, especially in the current time frame, it will happen again, and be able to use that understanding to be able to better respond to the event. Another thing I would say is communications. So similar to Perry's world, in the water and wastewater world, we're relying on communications. And so we've got to have redundancy in those systems. Lake Charles has 7 water plants present. We operate those water plants from one facility, and we use, as of right now, fiber networks to connect the other facilities. What we're in the process of implementing now is a redundant radio system to where when we lose that fiber, we can fall back on radio as an alternative, or vice versa. Having those redundant systems in place within the utility is critical. And so it's just trying to contemplate what all could occur through a disaster, and wanting to have a 24-hour-a-day service that you're providing to your customers has got to be the key.
Excellent. Chris, this is a question for you. What helped you make the decision to invest in Lake Charles, a community that went through such a string of serious natural disasters between 2020 and 2021?
Well, obviously, I'm a little biased, right, because I love the area and love living here and was happy to come back. Worked in Texas, worked in Arkansas, worked in Mississippi and in Oklahoma, and crossed some of the western states as well. So the opportunity to come home was I jumped on it, right? But Vex's is, we are a company, we're a for-profit company. You know, there is a lot of federal grant money that's out there in the world. One of the things that we talk about when making an investment like this is Vex's Fiber has come into this market without any public funding. This is all private equity that's coming in, so it's not necessarily your tax dollars that are delivering that out to folks that are in the city limits that generally have access to broadband providers. You know, that grant money is great for rural development, for places where companies won't go in and build. But bringing Vex's Fiber, we really, as a business, we look at it and say, you know, where's there an opportunity to be 100% underground, where our competitors can't say that? Where's a opportunity to build a 100% fiber network, where our competitors can't say that? And where's a place to do that, where we can also do it in a place where we don't have to make a phone call out to Dallas or out to New York, or, you know, we can make all of those, anything that we operate or anything that we run in this market doesn't have to leave the walls of our office at 2912 Ryan Street right next to Market Basket. We can do all of it right here. If it makes sense, we're just going to pull the trigger on it. So the opportunity to do those things and stand out from the other providers that are here and deliver a service that's, you know, no longer it's no longer something that you can pick or choose if you want to have it or not. You got kids in school, you need the internet. You work from home, you need the internet. You can't afford, you know, to go out to the movies or go out to dinner every night. You need the internet to provide some entertainment for you at home. It's not the luxury that it used to be 20 years ago or even 10 years ago.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate that. This question is for you, Mr. May. Resiliency can come at a cost. How do we ensure that investments are made and the utility bills remain affordable at the same time?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, Louisiana has, if not the lowest, one of the lowest rates in the U.S. You know, Oregon generally is pretty competitive with us, but generally we have the lowest electric rates in the U.S. I see a couple of astonished looks on your face. Yes, it's true. Now, it doesn't mean we have the lowest bills, because it's hot here, right? And we do run our air conditioners a lot and so forth. I was on the second floor a little while ago, and I feel like I can put premium gas in my car, because it must have been 60 degrees up there, right? But affordability is critically important, because we do serve about 30% of our customers are at the poverty level in Louisiana. So we have to be thoughtful about the products that we provide and so forth. And so as we're doing that, and look, actually, as we go through our process of allocating capital and so forth, and I know everybody on this stage has gone through capital allocation processes, bless you, and it really is about thinking about how we invest in those things to create value for our customers. And so, for instance, on resiliency, this package of 69,000 poles, 2,100 projects, consists of an average benefit to cost ratio of 9-to-1. And so what that means is it will either produce future savings from avoiding future costs to repair, or will create benefits of reduced outage cost, and that has value as well. So it's thinking about what that value of resiliency is and creating projects that actually produce value for our customers. Now, with that, though, it also means we have to be strategic, and great that you guys have all underground services. We're thinking about this, though. We need to be thoughtful about that. The cost to put electric wires underground are substantially higher than putting it overhead. So we're doing strategic projects underground. A little more than 10% of the projects that were approved by the LPSC, the Louisiana Public Service Commission, are going to be underground, but they're strategic in nature. Underground is not always the best thing for an electrical system. If you look at following Hurricane Ida in the New Orleans area, one of the last areas to get their power back on was in the Laplace area, was a golf course that had all underground cable, but they also had a lot of trees. And so those trees, when they fell, they pulled up all the cable. And what we're thinking about with resiliency is you do this overhead, the lines may fall, but you can get somebody to come by and pick those lines back up and put it on the pole. It's about lines that stay up and making sure we can have a resilient infrastructure and get the lights back on as well. The other thing I would say is, what does it cost not to have resilient infrastructure? As we deal with these ongoing challenges in terms of floods, in terms of windstorms and ice and those kinds of things, we really need to think about our communities where we need that resiliency. I mean, if you have a fortified roof on your house, and if you lost a roof or at least lost part of the roof like I did during Ida, you have a new roof on your house. And having a fortified roof means the next time we have a storm, you probably won't get water in your house. You may have damage on your roof, but you won't get water in your house. You get substantial savings on your insurance and so forth. So as we're thinking through what makes up that resiliency package, first and foremost is we keep affordability in mind. We make sure that those projects produce substantial benefit to cost ratios so that there's value being created from those projects. And we're thinking strategically about how we do those projects so that it produces the intended result, the intended outcomes of a resilient infrastructure without having burdensome costs that come with that.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. Vincent, your company has a long-term presence in the region. Where or were there any measures you took after the last major storm, which was Rita, that helped you get back in operation more quickly after Laura?
A few things. We planned stuff more, as Josh was talking about, put down a plan for how things should happen when we start to see a storm coming in. Our company itself, we don't evacuate, we don't evacuate. The employees that need to evacuate, we let them, but we have a list and a core group of employees that can't leave. Or if they can leave, there'll be some means for them to get them back immediately. But we plan that and look at what's going on the week before the hurricanes. If it's in the Gulf, we're sitting there saying, okay, who's what, when, where, and how, and working with the agencies and making sure that everybody's in communication of where things are going to be at when the situation arises. We looked at some hardened things that weren't hardened before, some things that happened. The city of Lake Charles had a big tower that fell down. And rebuilding that was a chore of figuring out how should it get built. The engineers and the architects all worked together to decide where we wanted to end up with. And now we have a core facility that's in the middle of the city that feeds and services the parish and the city itself. So we've got a lot of things in place that were smaller things, but some of the bigger things was that, and generators and how that was handling. A lot of problem with generators was didn't have power to site, waiting because of a tree fell or something, and we got to get electricity to that site, get communications up, and having generators available immediately and being able to hook them up. I mean, lots of times you got to have an electrician to do stuff, especially when it's in town and there's places that you need a certified electrician to be doing some of this work, and when there's no one around, where does that come from? So we put some things in place our company did to have personnel on staff that are capable of doing those things. So I hate using the word one-stop shop, but we try our best to be that when it comes to the response and the resiliency that we need to have to keep the parish and the city and all the agencies or things that we're working with all up and running.
Okay, thank you for that. Chris, this is for you. Once the decision was made, is there anything local leaders did that helped make it easier for your team to be successful?
Well, the easiest thing is being able to pick up the phone and call the mayor or the mayor's office and talk to him. There's a couple things. You talk about the big investment. It is much more expensive to go underground. Roughly it's about 30% more for us at cost. So the investment for Lake Charles alone is around $50 million to build out this network 100% underground as we're building it. Anytime we've had any hurdles or, anybody in the construction world, having a plan and having a budget's great, but most of the time you're going to go over budget. The plan's not going to survive. First time you put a shovel in the ground, you're going to break something or something's going to happen, especially at the speed at which we would like to get this thing done. We'd like to be finished building out all of Lake Charles by the end of this year or early next year, and there's still a lot of room for us to grow there. So, but being able to sit down and really have just frank conversations with local leaders, sit at the table whether it's coming to an agreement on a franchise agreement, which I don't know if we can say, but I think it's probably the most beneficial franchise agreement of anybody providing internet service to the city. So Vexus is happy to sign it, but not necessarily happy with the terms. So as we go out and build, but, you know, from that to permitting to, you know, a number of things that you need to deal with walking through the city. And what we really bank on is, again, I can't reference the having, you know, local accountability to be able to answer the question if something does happen. If there is something that's, whether it's a damage claim or a service disruption or you know, just a random question. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in the office with somebody who just walked in and wanted to sit down and have coffee and ask me 100 things about fiber. And you know, I've got lots of background in the industry, but fiber is still somewhat new to me, so I might learn something as we go along. But you know, it's just being able to sit down and have that open conversation when you have a question or want, you know, need to know what do we want to do here and what's best for the community, not just best for Vexus Fiber to keep plowing forward.
Okay, all right. Josh, for you, what would be some of the best lessons learned from 2020 or 2021 after Laura and Delta?
I'll reiterate again that planning effort. Planning is just so key to responding to those storms, and building in that infrastructure and doing so wisely and with wisely in two regards: prioritizing things and doing things in the most fiduciary responsible way possible. A lot of what we've done that's still in the works, but it's moving forward quickly, is we've pursued grants to be able to provide a lot of infrastructure in a resilient manner to be able to keep utility rates low. Pursuing those grants really helps us to be able to not have to charge that all forward to our customers. And, you know, building with that money, take it a step further, you build it resilient, and you're not having to come make these FEMA claims that we were talking about. Not having the losses that you had previously.
Maybe proximity to the transmitter. I don't know if you can maybe even stand up. That may help.
Benefits of an underground cable.
Good?
Yes.
All right.
There you go.
Where did I lose you?
I'm just glad it wasn't power.
Yeah.
No, but I guess just building resilient things effectively, pursuing the grants, pursuing the right projects, acknowledging what's a pipe dream and what's attainable in the present day to be able to provide that best level of service to your customers in that moment. We've got pipe dreams, no doubt, and we hope to get them funded, presumably by grants and different avenues, but you know, it takes a lot of time to do things. We've done a lot in the last 4 years. There's more in the works, and it's just continuing down that road of always wanting to improve and do better. Never being complacent with where you're at. There's always something better, whether it's through resiliency, redundancy, customer outreach, customer service. That whole song and dance is absolutely key. You know, another thing that I haven't mentioned that we've done, and it would relate to the hurricane as well as the freeze, is we did implement an automated meter reading system for Lake Charles, similar to Entergy, and probably had a lot of the same struggles that y'all did with that project as well. But you know, the gain on our end for that is to be able to use that system to determine the weaknesses in our system after a storm. You know, after Laura, after the freeze, we don't know where all the water's going, but it's leaving the pipes. And so we're having to send contractors and staff trying to just scour the city to try to understand where those leaks in the system are. Now, with our advanced water meter system, we can pinpoint those locations and effectively pursue those leaks and corrective actions in a more effective manner. And so I think that's one of the big things that we're going to, on the water side, that's going to help us significantly moving forward.
Excellent, thank you. This is a question for you, Mr. May, with regards to Texas just experienced great challenges following their latest hurricane. How will Entergy's resilience efforts ensure Southwest Louisiana doesn't experience something similar?
Yeah, so, you know, we learned something from every storm, and you were talking, we heard from each of you about planning. It really is about imagining what are the things that could go wrong and getting ahead of that in your plans and so forth. You go back to with Laura, you have a storm that comes in the middle of a pandemic. Think of the housing challenges that come. You can't bunk a bunch of line workers in the same room. You have the challenges come with that. So, when we do our planning, there's some evil folks that sit in a room somewhere and come up with these crazy ideas. And I worry about it because then I'm worried they're going to come true, right? But they come up with some very challenging things like, oh, you put your crews here and you have a flood, now you can't get to where the work is. Now what do you do? Or you can't get back to where housing is. Now what do you do? And so it really is about thinking through that plan, planning for those unknown events, creating these things, because it creates creativity about how you produce. It's also learning from those past experiences. We learn from every storm we have. And every storm is different. Every storm creates a new set of challenges. With that, though, I think it's important that we communicate with our local officials, with GOSEP, with the local emergency operations centers and so forth, having those conversations well ahead of a storm, and then when the storm shows up, I think is part of that. Now, with regard to infrastructure, we are replacing about 4,700 poles and infrastructure just in this area as part of that resiliency plan. That obviously will help. But during Laura, we had probably 1,400 structures that were damaged. It's the largest structure count that we've had in our history from that storm. So you have an infrastructure that's already beginning to be stronger as a result of, unfortunately, replacement from prior storms, but the investments we're going to make and so forth. But I think how do we avoid what happened in Houston? It really is about planning and getting ahead and having those conversations with people ahead of this so that we can be assured that we're thinking through the what-if scenarios. What if these events happen? What if? And in the case for Houston, you have a storm. And by the way, if you're part of the electric utility industry, you have a right to call everyone from the East Coast to the West Coast and ask them to come help. It's a great mutual assistance program. But as part of that program, you also have a obligation. Entergy Louisiana, for instance, is not going to ask for 5,000 crews to show up if it's predicted to hit in Corpus Christi, Texas, because then no one in Texas would have crews, right? So, there is a bit of a challenge when that storm continued to move more eastward, more northward. It did create a challenge of not having the crews you needed right then and there. But I believe our system will perform much better in the next storm, not knowing what that next storm is, because we learn each of those things. We're building a more resilient system. We're making sure that it's more adaptable to whatever that is that might show up. The other thing I wanted to note, and you talked about grants and so forth, as we built our resiliency plan, we talked to parish officials, state officials, city officials, and so forth, and talked about this is what we're planning to do. What did we miss? Like, for instance, one of the things that came up is, well, you didn't fortify this route. Well, there's nothing really important on that route, but that's a major evacuation route. We need to make sure the poles are standing when we have an event. So that's one of the learnings you get from that. Also, working with our parish officials, working with city officials and so forth, and grants and so forth. Building resilience infrastructure in communities. Brick grants is another way. It can also help reduce the cost of resiliency. So all of those things can help us prepare, and particularly when we do it in a collaborative way, we're likely to have a set of outcomes that are better because of that collaboration. And so could we have an event like Beryl? Every storm is different. Every storm presents a unique set of challenges. But I believe because of the close working relationship we have with so many advocates and stakeholders that we work with, that we're in a much better position to deal with whatever it is that comes.
Thank you, appreciate it. This is a question for you, Mr. Vincent. Can you tell us about your new communications tower and how it will expand your capabilities in the area?
Yeah, that was probably the most interesting thing that happened through the storm that was beneficial to the whole southwest Louisiana. We had a 350-foot tower the city owned in downtown Lake Charles on Enterprise. And tower's been there close to 50 years. It's went through a lot of hurricanes, especially Rita was a big one and everything else, and really kind of took it for granted until we woke up the next morning from Lawrence laying across the road into the neighbor's yard. And we're like, oh, shoot. And it was a no shoot, all right, because there was a lot of stuff that wasn't working that we relied on. Thankfully, we had a lot of redundancy built around the parish, and people, communications was still up. We had to improvise. But when we said, okay, we got to replace it, engineering and we sat down with everybody, the architects, mainly FEMA was involved. So how's this thing going to be resilient when they finish with it? And we ended up with a tower that's very sustainable. I definitely designed it to cover us for the next 50 years, for what I think will be 50 years. I probably won't be here, but we had a good observation of it. And the wind load on that thing at a fully loaded capacity, which is probably will never come close to it. It will handle about 175 mile an hour wind sustained, which is pretty strong on a continual basis. So we ended up with that. And communications is back up on it. We've got the state of Louisiana's using that site. Our local stuff's all on it. Some additional things that we didn't know if we could use or would be able to put on it. We put on it for broadband connectivity between Sheriff's Department, City of Sulphur. All the local agencies are using it. And we just adding now McNeese. We'll have a redundant radio station built on it. And the site is so hardened. We got generators. We got a lot of stuff going to it. Fibers going to it, and everything. So we're resilient to where we've got a communications structure that will give us response of radio communications, radio broadcast on your radio station, on your car or whatever. If we're dead in the water and nothing else is going on, we'll be able to broadcast from there. So we're real proud of it. The city is real proud of it. The whole Southwest Louisiana's kind of looking at it as, yes, we got a pretty substantial product here that, Lord's willing, it'll probably sustain our life, hopefully, and get a lot to look forward to for using it. So,
thank you, I appreciate that. So aside from planning and strategic planning that we've talked about today, can you gentlemen just share one item you think will be a game changer in your particular space as it relates to technology, maybe as an example, or practices that you hadn't already mentioned? I know you've mentioned underground and whatever, but can you maybe share a little thought around what do you think will be next in your space?
I could start. As you noted, we upgraded our meters to an automatic metering infrastructure, which basically are wireless meters, so we can see whether your power is on, power is off, that kind of thing. We can use that information to have a better understanding. When we do have damage to our grid, we can have more understanding of where that damage is, more accurate predictions and so forth. In addition, that data coupled with new equipment, we call, some of these things are called trip savers, where if you have driven around after a hard thunderstorm, you'll see there's fuse brackets where the fuse burns, often a tree or something gets on the line and it burned the fuse. You can have a trip saver. Instead of having that fuse burn, it will disconnect the line for a short time. That often will allow a branch, or if it's a squirrel, which is the biggest enemy of the grid known to man, if there's an animal on the line, it will release that and then reconnect, and oftentimes that will be enough to redo that. Also microgrids. We have proposed a project. We looked at what would it take to improve resiliency in southeast Louisiana, extreme southeast Louisiana. And one of the things we needed to do is rebuild the transmission line. As we thought about what would it take, as you imagine scenarios where you could have increasingly strong storms, the cost of building a transmission system grows up exponentially. And so one of the things we're looking at is something called a power barge, where you essentially have a floating barge, and it's not intended to move out of harm's way. It's intended to be in harm's way, but it can float and continue to provide power and actually disconnect from the rest of the grid and supply a local area. So for instance, Port Fourchon is where we're proposing that. If you're familiar with Port Fourchon, it has a tremendous effect on the nation's energy security. So it's a critical asset from a U.S. perspective. But thinking differently about how we create those microgrids and so forth. So technology in general is going to help us improve the way we respond to the storm. Another example, AI. AI is already helping us. If you call our call service center, I hope you don't need to call our call service center, but if you do call our call service center, you have AI working in the background already trying to figure out what is the problem, did you have this problem before, how do we help you fix that? AI is also looking at signals we get from our automatic metering infrastructures and predicting, does the signal look like you could have a transformer failure at some point in the future? So AI is allowing us to sample massive amounts of data and look at when do you see parts of the grid that are based upon degradation of the signal or changes in that signal, allow you to predict that transformer may go out, or you may have a lightning arrestor that's beginning to go bad. Because if you think about the massive amount of exposure we have from essentially 37,000 miles of distribution line, 6,000 miles of transmission line, having an understanding of where we have potential damage or degradation that we can get ahead of and fix, that's how we can use technology to improve the way we serve power.
Thank you. Chris?
You think about how quickly technology advances. Just from the time that we've started building in Lake Charles, we've had advances in technology that allowed us to be even more redundant. And in the fiber world, we think of redundancy is can we flip it from one side to the other at a mass scale, or can we have multiple pipelines into the city at one time? So having 3 different connections from 3 different companies coming in is one way to be redundant. But the advancements in technology have allowed us to, as we build out in the city, we build about every 5 city blocks is roughly how we permit out in the city. And we can actually, the technology we're using now in our infrastructure and our network architecture, we can flip the direction that your signal is coming from if there's any disruption in service at that small of a scale. So instead of being a full city, you flip it from one side to the other. On one block or even inside of a block, we can flip it from one side to the other to come from a different direction if there's any disruption from a cut fibers or tree that falls down or any of those things. So this also allows us to not need to be in residential neighborhoods in maintenance windows from 2 to 4 a.m. We can now do that work during the day when people are out at work and it's not so much a disruption. You don't see a flashing beacon light outside of your house, or need the safety and security out there as well. As you don't have to have anybody out there blocking roads or building traffic as you go through. You can do these things during the day because you've got this technology that allows you to flip it from one side of the street to the other side of the street, keep the service on at your home while we do the repair for whatever happened inside the architecture.
Thank you. Perry?
Well, technology is what we are. Our company pretty much thrives on it, and we usually stay on top of everything that's available. Today, probably the biggest thing we come out of this is our technology today enables us to monitor everything. And as Josh said, in some of the wireless stuff the city is doing, we have redundancy, whether it's fiber, copper, wireless, or whatever. There's more than one way to talk to and look at everything. So today, most everything we put in, and we're monitoring it. We can see what's happening 24/7. We know if there's changes. If a hurricane's getting ready to come, we can look at status of things, how things are before the hurricane gets here, tell us what fuel levels are in a generator tank, or whether there's voltage or not voltage, or something's having a problem, the signal's not strong as it should be. We can see everything today way ahead of time, and we implement that in everything that we do today. It costs money to do that. Some of the expenses you put in, like putting fiber underground, 100%. We're 100% monitor everything that's capable of monitoring and have redundancy with it. So we know what's going on at any given time and able to respond when it comes time to recover, what the status was when we lost it, if we did lose it, or what the status of it is when it's dropped out or something's happened. So we stay on top of that, and today it's a standard of what we do.
All right, Josh.
As far as technology is concerned, I would kind of humble brag on the city's behalf that much of the work that they've put in place from Lore to now is about as advanced as the technology that exists in the water and wastewater industry. Some of it is still in the works, but much of the planning is in place. The money is set aside, the investments being made to make the utility system here as advanced as it can be. I think a big part of that is acknowledging some of the shortcomings we had, and that's where the investment has been driven. The redundancy, you'll hear me say it a million times, it's key because you never know when you're going to lose something. Another component of that, I would say, is asset management. Asset management's pretty key. You can only take an asset's existence to heart so much until you need to gain an appreciation of what the life cycle of that asset is. And so acknowledge how long that asset's going to last and have a plan in place to replace it. Don't wait until it dies to replace it. That's not technology, that's common sense, but there is technology in place to help you manage your asset management system. And so that's one thing that I'd like to see us continue to drive forward, is an asset management program driven by technology instead of failure.
Thank you, panelists. I think now is the time for our questions. So if you haven't turned in any questions from the audience, we'd appreciate you submitting additional questions. Some of those questions look very technical. All right, we'll start off with the question for you, Philip, with regards to renewable energy. The question is, will these new upcoming solar farms help power Louisiana through Entergy?
Yes, they will. A couple of things about solar. First of all, when we buy solar from a solar facility, it has to meet certain resilient requirements. We want to make sure that those things will be able to deliver power following a storm. So there's things like how deep are the foundations for those solar panels? Is the tracker, because most of these things track the sun to improve the efficiency and so forth, is the tracker rated for a major storm? Those kinds of things. So, but importantly, with solar, it is something that we can add, and right now it's very economic to do that. The second thing is, we have an enormous amount of investment opportunity coming to the state of Louisiana. I don't know if you saw, there was an LSU Center for Energy study, $222 billion across the Gulf Coast. 57% of that is coming to the state of Louisiana. So think about that for a minute. We're punching way above our weight. Look, the states to the east of Louisiana, they only make a couple of percent. The balance of that is mostly going to Texas. But given the amount of coastline they have, it's significantly more. In almost every project, expansion, new business, greenfield, brownfield, their request is, can we get lower carbon or no carbon energy? These folks have commitments that they've made, and so they need green, renewable energy. The best way for us to do that at this time is through solar. That's the lowest cost. In the future, we'll have wind in the Gulf of Mexico. As you know, we have a firm that has bought leases off the south of here for future wind farms. Now that's probably another good 5+ years away. But if you're not planning for those kinds of things, you won't have those things when they're ready to be mature and so forth. So with regard to renewable energy, not only do I believe it's an efficient and economic way to serve load, it also is an enabler of new economic growth. And you look at what's going on just in this region, a big chunk of that investment is coming to this part of the state. And we are going to need lower carbon energy. And one more thing about that is, regardless of who wins this next election, policies and customer preferences, policies are not driving the need for green energy. Customer preferences are driving the need for green energy. Sasol, right? You think about what goes into Tide Pods, for instance. Tide Pods, they're not only thinking about the energy that's going into making that Tide Pod, they're thinking about the companies that are using it. So they're thinking of Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. For instance, with the Tide Pod, you can turn your temperature down on your washing machine. Am I stealing your thunder here? Turn your temperature down on...
I'm not on the panel, but that is an accurate portrayal.
You can turn the temperature down on your washing machine so that you're using less energy, which means a lower carbon footprint, and that's a popular item. If you're selling items to Europe, and gosh, we're selling a lot of natural gas to Europe right now. They want to know that it's as low carbon as possible. In fact, there's something called a cross-border adjustment. They adjust the price of that product based upon the carbon intensity of the product so they can compete against products in Europe. And guess what? With green energy, we're very, very competitive because energy is low cost, and if you can add renewable energy, it's going to mean that this region will be competitive, not just for the next few years, but for decades to come by planning ahead, and not from a policy perspective, but from a customer demand perspective, giving them what they want.
Thank you, appreciate that. This is for the entire panel, so I appreciate you guys thinking through this one. How does your long-term investment strategy address the ongoing out-migration of residents and businesses? And how are you justifying infrastructure investment with the likelihood of fewer customers to maintain it? So I'll start on the other end with you, Josh, on that one.
Loaded. No, so I mean, I think as it would relate to people leaving the community, I think a lot of the investment that we've made from a storm response standpoint is significant. I mean, I think there's a lot of people, if they're coming home after a storm and they've lost shingles on their roof and they're going to have to deal with that, that's one thing. But if they're coming home, there's no utilities available, no water, no sewer, you just soon turn around and leave. I mean, there's nothing to come back to until those services are reinstated. And so, I think there's, you know, kind of have to walk the balancing act, but people do think that water and sewer is a God-given right and not a utility, something we battle constantly. I understand the mentality towards it, agreed to some extent, but we need it to be there because people have that mentality. You got to pay for it still, but it needs to be there so that they can come home and things are as close to normal as it would be. And so that's, I guess, would be my response to that.
Okay, thank you. Barry?
Wow, that's loaded. I mean, you look at it a bunch of different ways. Like, I'm kind of always looking for the good part of everything. I hate to hear the people leaving Lake Charles. When I look at it, the business side of things, I always try to make sure we're on the leading edge of technology. And when I talk to employees and people around town and people that live here, and then look at new hires when they come in, I'll even ask them, what do you think about Lake Charles? Or are you from here? Where are you from? And why did you come here? And I hear some people say, hey, I'm leaving the next hurricane. I ain't staying for the next one. Or if it comes, I'm out of here forever. I try to encourage that. I mean, everything we do, when I invest in our company, I invest in Southwest Louisiana, and the effort I put out for Southwest Louisiana, I want us to be on the leading, cutting edge of everything. And I try to make sure that people see that. We're not some little stepchild town on the side or inside of the Texas border that doesn't know anything or have anything, I want to make sure that we can portray that we're the best, the latest, and greatest technologies happening here. And I try to make sure our company shows that, and to show that the stuff that we do in town and then do within the industry, that it's all the latest stuff. We're not waiting for anything. We're doing it, And I try to portray that throughout our company and people I talk to. So my investment is hopefully it'll sustain itself and have maybe a foothold in people that when they see things and hear things and know what we're doing, that we're for real and it's solid.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Oh, well, you're making a bet on the area, right? And it's kind of a joke. I see 2 casinos from here, maybe a third one, right? But you bet on the growth that's bringing back there, and as a provider, we want to be a part of that too. We're building contractors and bringing contractors in to help build out what we're building out now. That's a short term, right? That's to meet an immediate need. That's not a long-term growth model. The rest of the business that we operate is investing in the local town, hiring local people, hiring local leadership, hiring local technicians, building out not just through Lake Charles, but into Sulphur, into the surrounding areas that are in Southwest Louisiana. And it's making that bet to, can we be a part of that, not just as a hiring company, but also as a provider that can make the area more attractive to other businesses to come in.
Okay. Philip?
So in terms of how we think about this over long term and so forth, first of all, I want to just step back and think about, we've been through, my home suffered a lot of damage from Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. got another roof out of Vida. So, but recovery is hard, right? Recovery requires resilient people, and there's a lot of challenges that come with living in a recovering community. This is a very resilient area. And there will be people who decide the cost to insure my home is too much. The cost to make a more resilient community is more than, the effort to do that may be more than they want to do. That's one of the things that happen after particularly back-to-back storms like we've seen. So we're going through that period where there is folks who have decided that they're tired. They don't want to go through it again and so forth. But step back and look at $222 billion along the Gulf Coast. 57% of that is coming to the state of Louisiana. Most of that investment is coming to the I-10-12 corridor in south. So about 95% of the investment is along the Gulf Coast. These things that you see outside the window here that produce the chemicals that we need, the products that we need, the conveniences of life, they're here for a reason. They're here because of the infrastructure that is here, because of deep water access, the ability to have feedstock, to be able to take that product and ship it anywhere in the world and be one of the most competitive products, even if you're competing in their backyard. So while we do plan for what we believe the population in, I frankly am very optimistic about what the future of this state is, and particularly this region. Very few other parts of the country, when they express what are your economic development opportunities, do they put a B after that number. $222 billion along the Gulf Coast, 57% of that in this particular region is dealing with, and I see our mayor in the back corner there, I'm sure he can tell you what that number with a B is, but we're talking tens of billions of dollars. Other people see the value of this community. Your company certainly sees the value of this community. The folks I'm sitting on this stage with see the value of this community. I believe we're going to see, yes, it's tough to get over, and recovery is tough, but the opportunities before our state, and particularly this region, are unprecedented. Unprecedented in certainly my lifetime, probably most people's lifetime. You have to go back to post-World War II to see the investment opportunity that is coming to this state and this region. So in terms of what are our long-term expectations and how are we planning for growth in the long term, well, we're looking at industries that says, I'm going to place my bet here in Southwest Louisiana. We're looking at new companies who are coming from Asia and from Europe and South America and saying, I'm going to place my bet right here in Southwest Louisiana. So I'm extremely optimistic about what will come. Billions of dollars comes with tens of thousands of jobs. Those tens of thousands of jobs come with new tax base, better schools, better teachers, better quality of life, and new neighborhoods, more people, and better outcomes financially and economically for our families and our communities. So yes, we do plan for what we expect to be seeing, but when we look across our service territory, Southwest Louisiana is not one that we're writing off.
Thank you. This is a question for you again, Philip, but I'm going to ask Chris as well to address how will your company's resiliency efforts and initiatives impact the workforce, and basically what are the skills required as far as craft or trade to support it?
Well, we have a great partnership with Suella. We have there's ongoing courses. We go to talk to those courses. They graduate. So in the fiber industry, you're looking for folks that can, not just learn to do the installation, but the network side of it. And there's fiber splicing. There's maintenance programs that are out there. And it makes them not just attractive for to come work for Vexus Fiber, but attractive for all of the expansion and fiber providers that are out there building out into whether it's rural development up 165 or 171, or future business or future the ability to go work in a new workforce, and that makes it even more attractive to come to Southwest Louisiana and learn a new skill set and then move up into the world. So it's developing a new workforce in that industry, adding and contributing to the community in that way.
Okay, thank you. Philip?
Yeah, in terms of resilience, so the resilience plan that was passed by the Louisiana Public Service Commission is $1.9 billion. It's been over 5 years, but really the bulk of that, front end of that's going to be some planning, 3 years of a $1.9 billion spend, and then last year, year 5, to finish some things up. That $1.9 billion is on top of about $1.5 billion a year that we spend normally on infrastructure. It's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money because the growth we're seeing in the state of Louisiana is exceeding most places in the U.S. We have a growth from our industrial sales that is the envy of the industry. We're seeing sales growth that are growing at 7, 8, 9, 10% a year for industrial. So in terms of what does that mean for folks and workforce and so forth, first of all, we're going to need transmission lines. If you have skills to work on electrical systems and so forth, that's important. We can do that with our trade schools. We have partnerships, as you know, with SOELA, with other technical schools across the state so far. And I will tell you, I have peers in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, and our trade and technical schools, our community colleges are very responsive to creating the skills we need for things that are up and coming. So transmission lines, those distribution lines. We focus on local and diverse contractors so that we can have, because we only thrive when our communities thrive. By spending money locally and diversely, we can help our communities thrive. So in terms of what it means for the workforce, there's lots of job opportunities associated with our resilience program, but importantly, lots of job opportunities about this growth opportunity that we talked about earlier. I'm sure in Southwest Louisiana, you're aware that there are more chemical engineers per capita in Louisiana than any other state. And of course there are. What else? Where else would they be, right? Even civil engineers. Sorry about that. But yeah, there are enormous growth opportunities. And I will tell you, I am more excited about the future of this state in the last couple of years than I have been in my 38 years in this industry. I have daughters who are 17 years old. They will be going off to college at the end of next year. If we are successful, not only will they want to come back to Louisiana, they will have to come back to Louisiana to thrive, because that is the opportunity we have. If we're not successful, and it's ours to lose, by the way, if we're not successful, they will want to come back to Louisiana, but won't have the opportunity to do so. So to me, the workforce opportunity is tremendous, not just because of the resilience that we're building, but because the companies you represent, the companies you all represent, the companies that make up South Louisiana have an enormous opportunity. They believe in this area, and I think the economic growth that will come from that is going to be incredible and produce new opportunities and new prosperity for our communities.
Thank you. All right. Philip, I'm sorry, Perry, this is for you. You may have answered this question earlier, but I just want to make sure I cover it. The impact of losing the Capital One building for the transmission signals, how does the new tower solve this issue?
It basic filled right in. We actually had a lot of redundancy up there. That was kind of interesting to have the the Capital One tower was kind of I guess we took it for granted. It was able to access it during the hurricane. We could, even if we didn't have power in the building, we could always go up the stairs and get up there and not have to climb. And in our world, we have to have like in the power world, you got people climbing in the weather. They got to climb up a pole or something and repair things or check things out or get a bucket truck or something. So that place we could access, we lost it. The redundancy that we had up there, we strategically moved it around to different places. We lost that asset of being able to access it in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning and in the middle of a storm and not worry about anything. So we have that to contend with. But at the same token, the new tower is built so strong and resilient, and everything we're putting on there, we're reinforcing it from the standards. It's higher, at a higher standard than it is, that it normally should be, or what the standards are. And so, our goal is to make sure that what we put up there on that tower, we don't have to climb it in the middle of the night, that the wind and stuff will hold on, it'll hold on to it and won't blow an antenna off the top of the tower or something of that nature. But it is, the new tower is an asset for us, a big asset.
Excellent, thank you. That it concludes our questions from the audience. I want to thank our panelists for being here today, so let's give them a round of applause.
Lines. If you have skills to work on electrical systems and so forth, that's important. We can do that with our trade schools. We have partnerships, as you know, with Soella, with other technical schools across the state so far. And I will tell you, I have peers in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, and our trade and technical schools, our community colleges are very responsive to creating the skills we need for things that are up and coming. So transmission lines, those distribution lines. We focus on local and diverse contractors so that we can have, because we only thrive when our communities thrive. By spending money locally and diversely, we can help our communities thrive. So in terms of what it means for the workforce, there's lots of job opportunities associated with our resilience program, but importantly, lots of job opportunities about this growth opportunity that we talked about earlier. I'm sure in Southwest Louisiana, you're aware that there are more chemical engineers per capita in Louisiana than any other state in the union. Of course there are. What else? Where else would they be, right? Even civil engineers. Am about that. But yeah, there are enormous growth opportunities. And I will tell you, I am more excited about the future of this state in the last couple of years than I have been in my 38 years in this industry. I have daughters who are 17 years old. They will be going off to college at the end of next year. If we are successful, not only will they want to come back to Louisiana, they will have to come back to Louisiana to thrive, because that is the opportunity we have. If we're not successful, and it's ours to lose, by the way, if we're not successful, they will want to come back to Louisiana, but won't have the opportunity to do so. So, to me, the workforce opportunity is tremendous, not just because of the resilient that we're building, but because the companies you represent, the companies you all represent, the companies that make up South Louisiana have an enormous opportunity. They believe in this area, and I think the economic growth that will come from that is going to be incredible and produce new opportunities and new prosperity for our communities.
Thank you. All right. Perry, this is for you. You may have answered this question earlier, but I just want to make sure I cover it. The impact of losing the Capital One building for the transmission signals, how does the new tower solve this issue?
It basically filled right in. We actually had a lot of redundancy up there. That was kind of interesting to have the the Capital One tower was kind of I guess we took it for granted. It was able to access it during the hurricane. We could, even if we didn't have power in the building, we could always go up the stairs and get up there and not have to climb. And in our world, we have to have like in the power world, you got people climbing in the weather. They got to climb up a pole or something and repair things or check things out or get a bucket truck or something. So that place we could access. We lost it. The redundancy that we had up there, we strategically moved it around to different places. We lost that asset of being able to access it in the middle of the night at 2 in the morning in the middle of a storm and not worry about anything. So we have that to contend with. But at the same token, the new tower is built so strong and resilient, and everything we're putting on there, we're reinforcing it from the standards. It's higher, at a higher standard than it normally should be, or what the standards are. And so our goal is to make sure that what we put up there on that tower, we don't have to climb it in the middle of the night, that the wind and stuff will hold on, it'll hold on to it and won't blow an antenna off the top of the tower or something of that nature. But it is, the new tower is an asset for us, a big asset.
Excellent, thank you. That it concludes our questions from the audience. I want to thank our panelists for being here today, so let's give them a round of applause.